welcome back. Today we are going to take a journey into one of the most controversial and fascinating narratives of our time, the story of humanity's true origin as told by author and researcher Graham Hancock. And let me, before we start, apologize for my pronunciations of different names, cities. If you need the correct spelling, please look at the transcripts. So back to the podcast. For more than 30 years, Hancock has been asking one simple provocative question. What if everything we think we know about the past is only a small part of a much larger truth? What if an advanced civilization existed long before the first cities of Mesopotamia were built? A civilization that was destroyed in a global catalysm, and what left behind traces of our archaeologists either cannot see or refuse to acknowledge. Hancock is often called a pseudoscientist, a pseudo-archaeologist, a pseudo-historian, a man who presents fascinating theories without evidence. But here is the one interesting thing. In his books, and he emphasizes again and again, he footnotes everything. He cites scientific articles, he references recognized researchers, he points to geological and genetic studies. His claim is not that he found the lost civilization. His claim is that mainstream archaeology has built a house on cards that is about to collapse because new discoveries keep showing that human history is much older, much more complex, and much more catastrophe-prone than we have previously believed. Today we are going to dive into Hancock's extensive body of work based on a series of lectures he has given in the recent years. We traveled from the pyramids of Egypt to the 12,000-year-old stone circles of Turkey, from the earthworks of the Mississippi Valley to the deepest secrets of the Amazon rainforest. We will meet geologists, geneticists, and astronomers who have all helped shake the foundation of how we understand our past. And in the end, we will ask ourselves, why does this story matter us today? So settle in, we are going to have a talk about a species with amnesia. So let's start where Hancock started, in Egypt. The year was 1989. He was researching another book about the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia, and for the first time he stood before the Great Pyramids of Giza. And he was, as he said, staggered. For most of us, the pyramids is an impressive monument, perhaps tools for pharaohs like Khufu and Khafre. For Hancock, they were something entirely different. He seen them as a kind of three-dimensional book, an astronomical clock that tells us about the time long before the Egyptian dynasties. It is a message carved in stone, meant to last for thousands of years. Hancock's argument builds on the recognition of that many Egyptologists today accept that the ancient Egyptians identified the god Osiris with the constellation of Orion. They believe that the souls of the dead travel into a heavenly realm called the Duat, which lay between the constellation of Leo and Orion, with the Milky Way as the great celestial river. This is a cosmology deeply rooted in the night sky. But here, where it gets interesting, Hancock's colleague Robert Bauval pointed out many years ago that the three large pyramids on the Giza Plateau is positioned in a way that exactly mirrors the three belt stars of the Orion's belt. This is remarkable itself. But the crucial point is that the sky of the pyramids are mirroring is not the sky that would have been seen over Egypt in 2000 BC. When Egyptologists believe that the pyramids were built, no. The sky encoded in the pyramids' placement on the ground corresponded to the sky that appears between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. Why is that important? Because the Earth does not stand still. It has a slow wobble on its axis. This phenomenon astronomers is called precession. That means that the stars that rise behind the sun at the spring equinox change over time. It takes 2,160 years for the sun to move through one of the zodiac constellations, and it takes 26,000 years to complete a full circle. This is a clock that ticks extremely slowly, and Hancock argues that the pyramids are precisely set to this clock. The same story is told about the Sphinx. The massive lion with the pharaoh's head stares east. Each year on the spring equinox, the sun rises directly in front of it, and at the same astronomical epoch, 12,800 years to 11,600 years ago, the constellation of Leo rose behind the sun. The Sphinx, in other words, is gazing at its own celestial counterpart. Hancock points out that the ancient Egyptians had a name for this epoch. They call it Tepe, which means the first time. It was the age of the god, the time when the foundations of the civilization were laid. The oldest pyramid text written inside the Pyramid of Saqqara describes the journey through the Duat. They speak about the winding waterway, the Milky Way, as a central route for the soul. It is as if the pyramids are magnificent structures tells us this is where it all begins, and it began more than 12,000 years ago. For Hancock, this is the first crucial clue that an ancient civilization possessed such advanced astronomical knowledge that they could map the sky for an epoch which lay more than 8,000 years before the Egyptian dynasties. But if this was only about Egypt, the skeptics would have a point. It would have been a coincidence that makes Hancock's arguments so powerful is that he finds the same patterns scattered across the globe. He does not call this diffusion, which means that Egypt taught Mexico or Mexico taught Egypt. He calls it a shared inheritance from a distant common ancestor. And here I would like to add a comment of my own. What Hancock is doing is basically that he is doing pattern recognition. And today, in our society, pattern recognition is everything, because that's the foundation of investment of money, of searching of information, etc. What happens in Google when you search for something is actually that the system is looking for similar patterns. It's basically pattern recognition, and the same goes with all kinds of investments on Wall Street and wherever you want to place your money. It is that what you are looking for is a pattern of money. So what Graham Hancock is actually doing is that he is looking for a well-known method of creating money. He just used it on the history. And despite what people that does not earn their own money, they think that is actually a well-known strategy, and it works very well. You can look at the founders of the Magnificent Seven, the 7 largest US companies. They are all electronic. It's Microsoft, it's Meta, it's, you name it. They are all very rich. Back to the text here. If we take Mexico as an example, the ancient Mayas is calling their underworld Xibalba. And where was Xibalba located? In a region of the sky in which the Milky Way runs. Just like in Egypt, they also worship Orion. In the ancient Mayan city of Utalan in Guatemala, the major temples were oriented to the stars of Orion. A researcher named Fernandez was able to prove that all the city's main temples were aligned with the point where Orion stars were set in the horizon. But it does not stop there. Hancock took us to the Mount Wheel of Alabama in the United States. Mount Wheel is a large ceremonial center from the so-called Mississippian culture built by Native Americans long before the Europeans arrived. And everywhere at this site you will find recurring symbols, the hand and the eye motif. Hancock reads this as an informational sign at Mount Wheel that stories is passed down among various tribes tell that the dead enter the afterlife through an opening marked by the great warrior's hands in the sky. One account described that hand as the constellation as we know as Orion's belt in the wrist, its fingers pointing downward. A faint cluster of stars in the center of the palm is the portal to the path of the soul or the path to the land of the dead. This is exactly the same concept as in Egypt. And just as in Egypt, the soul has to make a leap to get through the portal. George Langford, a recognized authority in Native American folklore, notes that the portal in the hand must be entered by a leap in the optimum time, precisely the leap of the soul up to Orion that we see in Egypt. And then there is the fearsome figure that the archaeologist calls the brain smasher. In Mount Wheel tradition, it's a female figure whose task is to crush the brain of the unworthy souls attempting to complete the journey. She destroys them permanently. In Egypt, we find the Eater of the Death in the judgment scene in the Book of the Death, a being that devours the condemned. And Hancock has even found a vignette from an ancient Egyptian tomb showing that the goddess who make a man chop opens his own skull, his own brain skull. The accompanying text says she lives from the blood of the damned. The pattern is so consistent that Hancock concludes that there must have been a global religious system focused on the soul's journey after death, on judgment, on rebirth, and on becoming one with the stars. The system does not originate in Egypt or in Mexico. It was inherited from a third party, a lost civilization whose knowledge was spread across the entire world. If an advanced civilization existed for more than 12,000 years ago, then the natural question, what happens to it? Why haven't we found its cities, its roads, its everyday objects? Why are the traces so hard to see? The answer, Hancock says, is that it is a catastrophe of unprecedented scale. And here he draws on the work of a group of scientists who call themselves the Comet Research Group. This is a group of more than 60 geologists, physicians, marine biologists, and other specialists who for years has been published in peer-reviewed journals like Nature, Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, and the Journal of Geology. This is not pseudoscience, these are mainstream researchers who have reached a startling conclusion. Around 12,800 years ago, they argue that Earth was struck by multiple fragments of a large disintegrating comet. Some of these fragments were up to 2 kilometers in diameter. They hit it at speeds of tens of thousands of miles per hour, and they hit especially the North American ice cap and the Greenland ice cap. The evidence is found in a thin layer of sediment that exists all over the planet. It's called the Younger Dryas boundary layer. This layer is filled with materials that can only be formed by a massive cosmic impact. We're talking about nanodiamonds, iridium, platinum, carbon, melt glass, etc. These are exactly the same impact proxies that convinced the world of an asteroid killing the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Back then, the researchers Lewis and Walter Albers were ridiculed for years until the 6 Club crater was found in Mexico. Only then did the science apologize. The Comet Research Group is in the same situation now. The effect of these impacts were catastrophic. The North American ice cap, which was more than a kilometer thick, melted suddenly and wildly. The meltwater created the massive floods that forms what is now called the scraplands in the northwestern United States. Hancock described it traveling through this area with the geologist Randall Carlson. They have seen dry waterfalls, dry falls that is 10 times larger than the Niagara Falls. They have seen enormous granite boulders that was the size of building that has been carried hundreds of miles on icebergs during the floods. They have seen current ripples of the Carmel's Prairie waves in the landscape that are 30 to 50 feet high and perhaps 300 feet long, created by retreating floodwaters. 73% of the North American megafauna, mastodons, saber-toothed tigers, solid sloths, woolly rhinos were extinct. This was a global extinction event, and it was not just in America. Hancock mentioned that findings from Belgium, from Syria, from Chile, everywhere you find the same black layer filled with evidence of extreme heat and cosmic impact. The climate collapsed. The warming that has been underway since the last ice age stopped abruptly. The Earth fell back into a 1,200-year deep freeze, which geologists call the Younger Dryas. And then, 11,600 years ago, something else happened. A temperature rose dramatically, sea levels rose violently, which is today called meltwater pools 1P, another catastrophe. For Hancock, this is the story. This is the historical backdrop for the story of the lost civilization. If advanced societies existed in the Ice Age with coastal cities, trade routes, agriculture, and so on, they would have been crushed when this comet cascade. Coastal cities would have been flooded, farmland would have been destroyed by tsunamis and wildfires. Only a few people would have survived. And that brings us to the next part of Hancock's argument. What happened to the survivors? All over the world, we find myths about civilizing heroes that arrived after a great flood. In Egypt, it is Osiris and the seven sages. In Mexico, it's Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. In the Andes, it's Riococacha, the bearded figure who walks on water. In Mesopotamia, it's Zoan, which is the fish god who rises from the water to teach humanity writing, astronomy, and architecture. These figures are described as bearded men, and Hancock shows image of Olmec heads from Mexico with beards, something that is not typical for Native Americans. They are described as bringers of civilization's fundamentations like astronomy, agriculture, writing, laws, megalithic construction, and so on. They arrived in a dark time after a catastrophe. They are not the originators of the civilization, they are the restorers of civilizations. Hancock's crucial archaeologist evidence for this restoration are found in Turkey on a plateau near the Syrian border. It's called Göbekli Tepe, and that has changed everything. Göbekli Tepe is an enormous megalithic complex with T-shaped stone pillars weighing up to 20 tons. The pillars are carved with images of wild animals like snakes, fox, boars, birds, scorpions, etc. Archaeologists from the German Archaeologist Institute has dated it to 11,600 years ago. This is precisely the end of the Younger Dryas. This is precisely the date that Plato gives for the destruction of Atlantis. This is precisely the date of the meltwater pulse 1b raised the sea levels dramatically. But what marks Göbekli Tepe so revolutionary is that who built it. Before this discovery, archaeologists told us that agriculture came first. Only when you have a surplus of farming output, you could free up people to become specialists, architects, stonemasons, priests, etc. And then you could build large monuments. But at Göbekli Tepe, there was no agriculture. When they started, it was hunter-gatherers who built this enormous complex. And after 1,000 years, all of those hunter-gatherers has become farmers. This model turns upside down. Hancock argues that Göbekli Tepe is the evidence of civilization mission. Survivors of the lost civilization has come to the area. They mobilized the local population with a large secret building project. The project requires organization, planning, leadership, etc. It required people to work together across generations, and in the process, they taught the local hunter-gatherers different techniques like agriculture, animal husbandry, advanced stonemasonry, and astronomy. This is not a chance invasion, this is technological transfer. Hancock emphasized that Göbekli Tepe was not alone. Karen Tepe is another complex in the same region. It is just beginning in the excavation. There they have found a sanctuary carved directly out of bedrock with pillars that is cut from the living rock. It is a system that spreads across the southeastern Turkey, and Hancock sees the same T-shaped pillars, the same animal carving, the same man bags, small bags. Those are carried by the Mesopotamian sharks, reappearing thousands of miles away in Peru and Malta on the East Island. For him, this is a fingerprint, a tracing pointing toward a common origin. You would think that the Amazon rainforest is one of the last places you will expect to find traces of an ancient civilization. It is one of the most inaccessible and hostile environments on the earth, but Hancock takes us out into the jungle where the mysteries piles up. First, there is a genetic mystery. In 2018, two independent research teams, one led by Cosimo Posch and David Reich, the other by Eske Willerslev, published studies in the journals called Cell and Science. They have found a strong genetic signal in certain isolated Amazonian tribes. The Suri, the Quaternarian, and the Savant that links them to the Papuans and the Austrian Aboriginals. This signal is not found anywhere in North America population. It is not found in Siberia, where, according to the standard model, all Native Americans are supposed to have come from. So how did this signal get to Amazon? Hancock quotes Eske Willerslev, which is one of the world's leading geneticists. Willerslev says that based purely on the genetic data, the most parsimonious explanation is that somebody is carrying this signal came to the Americans not through the Bering Straits, but by crossing the ocean directly into South America. Yet, however, it does not make practical sense. Hancock asked, why not? Because archaeologists did not believe that people for perhaps 10 or 20,000 years ago were capable of such a long ocean voyage, but Hancock points to ancient maps like the Pyramids map that shows coastlines that existed only during the Ice Age, where the sea level were 400 feet lower. Some of the mapped coastlines. So the question is, who? Second, there's ayahuasca. Hancock described the incredible science behind this sacred brew. Ayahuasca consists of two plants. One, chacruna, contains DMT, which is one of the most powerful psychedelics known to science. But DMT is not normally orally active. It is destroyed by the enzyme that in our guts is called monoamine oxidase. The second plant, the ayahuasca wine, contains precisely the substance that inherits this enzyme, the monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So when the two plants are cooked together, the DMT becomes orally active. Hancock points out that you could not accidentally find these two plants in a jungle with more than 150 plant specimens that together creates this chemical key. The evidence of systematic experimentation of scientific thinking, it is no different from inventing curare, the muscle relaxing poison that the Amazonian people also produced by combining several plants and boiling them for 72 hours while avoiding them at the deadly fumes. These are not primitive people, these are advanced chemists. Hancock mentioned that the evidence of the ayahuasca has been found going back more than 4,000 years in the Amazon. He himself is convinced that it goes much further back. Third, then there are the geoglyphs. The recent clearings of the rainforest, which is a tragedy of itself, has revealed that something is not expected. Enormous earthworks, geometric patterns in the forms of squares, circles, octagons, and U-shaped structures stretching over large distances. Some of these structures are aligned to true north. One of them, Reno Castellans, is exactly at the same footprints as the Great Pyramids of Giza, 230 meters on each side, precisely oriented north. Hancock sees these geoglyphs as a part of the same cosmological system that we saw in Egypt and in the Mount Will. They represent the underworld, the Duat, and he connects them to the shamanic journeys where the ayahuasca is used to ascend the Milky Ways. The Amazons is not a pristine wilderness. It was a place where the ancient knowledge were practiced, cultivated, and passed down for thousands of years. Hancock also spends considerable time criticizing the archaeologist establishment's reluctance to change its models. He tells the stories of Jacques Singmars, a Canadian archaeologist that in the 1970s, 1980s, found evidence of human presence at Bluefish Caves in the Yukon dating 24,000 years back. At the time, the dominant theory was Clovis first, that the first people in the Americas were the Clovis culture, appearing in around 13,400 years ago. Singmars was ridiculed, his research funding were withdrawn, he was called a pseudoscientist, his career was destroyed. In 2017, a team of researchers led by a PhD student published a new study of the Bluefish Cave. They confirmed that humans were there 24,000 years ago. Singmars was vindicated, but as Hancock points out, it took nearly 40 years. And this is not an isolated incident. He mentioned Al Goodyear, who found evidence of humans in the North America from 50,000 years ago at a site called Tupper in South Carolina. He mentioned Tom Demer, who at the Cerruti Mastodon site at California has found evidence of human activity from 130,000 years ago. Bones broken to extract marrow, stone used as tools. That does not mean that there was an advanced civilization 130,000 years. It meant that there were humans, perhaps Homo erectus, or an early form of Homo sapiens, in America 130,000 years ago, which again challenged the established timeline. Hancock points out that the archaeologist does not behave like a science. A science changes its theories when new evidence emerges. Archaeology, he says, behaves like a religion. It relies on authority rather than evidence. It protects its dogma and it persecutes dissidents. He quotes that the Native American author Wayne Deloria Jr. says that the problem is in getting advocates of orthodoxy to admit that there is a problem, and that the solution that they have suggested is not really convincing. So, what does Hancock want us to take away from his journey? Why does it matter today to believe in a lost civilization from the Ice Age? For Hancock, it's not about the past, it's about the present and the future. His fundamental claim is that we suffer from collective amnesia. We have forgotten who we are, where we came from, and what force shapes us. And this amnesia makes us vulnerable. First, we have forgotten that civilization can fall. We live in a culture believing in endless progress. We believe that we are the goal of the history, the inheritance of culmination of evolution. But if an advanced civilization existed 12,000 years ago and was destroyed in a single day, then our own civilization is not immortal. That is an humbling recognition that our society refuses to make. Second, we have forgotten that there are other states of consciousness than the one we live in. Hancock calls this our normal state, the attentive, problem-solving consciousness. It's good for trade, for war, technology, and consumption, but it also brought us to the brink of an environment collapse, to a brink of nuclear war and global problems. The ancient cultures that he studies has access to the other states of consciousness through plants like ayahuasca. They used the state for prepare for death, to confront their own life, to gain vision, wisdom, and healing. Why are these plants criminalized today? Hancock argues that it is because they challenge the established order. A person who has a deep ayahuasca experience begins to ask the big questions. What are the meaning of life? How do I treat other people? What is my responsibility to the planet? These are dangerous questions for a society built on consumption, on submission and fear. Psychedelics, Hancock says, threatens the structure. The dark forces that wish to keep humanity in ignorance and control. And this is where it's... and then there is the threat in the sky. The comet that struck the Earth 12,800 years ago is not necessarily a one-time event. The fragment object that caused the Younger Dryas is still there. It lies in the Tarid Meteor stream through which the Earth passes every year. Scientists like Bill Napier and Victor Kloop had warned for decades that within this stream there are large blue dark objects several kilometers in diameter that has not yet been discovered. NASA has only identified less than 1% of the potential dangerous asteroids. But Hancock is not a doomsday prophet. We have the technology to detect and deflect a new catastrophe. It simply requires that we choose to spend resources rather than on war and destruction. It requires that we take the responsibility. It requires we wake up. So Hancock often ends his lectures with a passage from the heretic text written more than 2,000 years ago. It speaks of a time when Egypt is forsaken, when the gods has returned to heaven, and when men no longer find the universe worthy of reverent wonder. But it also speaks of rebirth, a time when God looks up and what happens and stops the disorder. He cleansed the world of evil with water and fire, and then the cosmos again became worthy of worship. Perhaps that is the rebirth Hancock sees taking shape in our time. Perhaps we are emerging from our amnesia. Perhaps we are ready to listen to the history as it is really lived in all of its complexity, its catastrophes, its lost wisdom, and its great overwhelming wonders. If there is one thing I hope you take away from this podcast, that is this. The questions are more important than the answers. And are we really the first civilization on the earth? What happened 12,800 years ago? Why do we find the same myth all over the globe? Why is our history so full of gaps and contradictions? These are the questions we all can ask, and these are the questions we all have the right to investigate. Thank you for listening.